Broadcasting Authority, Icasa, wants to amend sports broadcasting regulations. It says major international and national sporting events must be broadcast on free-to-air channels. These include the Summer Olympics and soccer, rugby and cricket World Cups. Icasa says the aim is to create greater access to sport, but some sports bodies are saying the regulations will have a negative impact on them. Interested parties have until the 4th of February to make written submissions. For more on this, I'm joined by Palesa Kadi from Icasa. Good evening, Palesa. Thanks very much for your time. Just take us through, give us perhaps a bit of background as to why, as Icasa, you felt it was necessary to make amendments to existing regulations.
We're making the amendments to the 2010 regulations, and it's common practice at Icasa that between 3 and 5 years we are able to review and look at the status quo in context to that particular local content. And at this venture, we have observed that there are silent features in the current regulations, and most of them are really identified in these draft regulations for South Africans to interact and also make sure that we find each other on how best the public can access sports through public broadcasting.
But obviously it can't be just change for the sake of change.
Yes. Something
ought to have informed the changes that you think need to be made. And I'm looking for that which made you think you need to make changes to what was existing.
There are two components for you. It's really the one of dispute resolution that we wanted to regulate with hindsight in terms of the current status of federations with our licensees, which includes your public broadcaster in this particular view. Therefore, we thought we've been silent on that, and for the past 10 years, there were no issues raised and no submissions regarding that fact, but also the absence of developmental sports and minority sports in terms of some form of obligation and understanding how best can the public access these. And for now, there's scarcity in that part of content.
So was it your observation that certain broadcasters, other than free-to-air or the national public broadcaster in this instance, were able to cream off, so to speak, and pretty much decide what they want to show, and that is what you're trying to deal with? Is that
definitely
correct?
It's the Broadcasting Act that enjoins broadcasters, particularly the public broadcaster, to do that. Therefore, as a regulator, we need to keep an eye on policy matters, also look at the economic sustainability, of course, and some of the legal and social in particular, social which deals with public interest.
So you're saying this is more directed at the national public broadcaster?
No, it's directed at all licenses to make sure that we are able to find each other, to provide access to sports for all South Africans. And this is a draft process. It's a drafting process. These are draft regulations. They are not final. We are awaiting inputs to have an open discussion with all those affected by this, including federations, to identify how best can we balance this through regulations.
But how much of this is really making up for what the SABC in particular isn't or hasn't been able to do?
With the absence of complaints, we are unable to put a finger and say there's non-compliance in terms of the SABC. Therefore, one continues to integrate and also seek a balanced effect of our regulations. For now, we've been hearing quite a common voice in that federations are saying do not. And all we need to do is to understand the intricacies around this. And why are we unable then to make sure that South Africans at large can view? We have also had social comments in particular saying that for any young South African or even older to access sports, they must sit in a tavern to Shibin and be exposed to watch a particular, and ours is to say, let's find each other.
Well, it could well be that, I mean, you're getting this via all sorts of other channels and platforms, but you are also South Africans. You are also at the receiving end of what everybody else is seeing or experiencing. What is your reading of what is the cause of these challenges that people have already identified? Because here we have a situation where an organization like SAFA, for example, says, only yesterday, this is how we dealt with this issue. Now we're being made to pay for the sins that other people have committed.
With the SAFA case in particular, it's a commercial agreement between the public broadcaster and the federation concerned. And as the authority, we are just beyond reproach if we were to enter into that space. But I do not carry a particular view as much as I am a content consumer, a sports-loving person in South Africa. But what the authority regards as necessary is to make sure that public, especially South Africans, are able to view sports through a channel that is open to all. And that is, at this moment, the public broadcaster. We have called in for submissions, and we want to ascertain the value and also pin down some of the economic factors that are discussed further. We also want those organizations that are saying economically it's not sustainable, including our licensees, the broadcasters, to give us the numbers and give us the turnaround strategy. Because if we were to look into finding ways through the commercial aspects, many South Africans would be excluded. That's a fact.
But isn't it also a fact that perhaps the reason the national public broadcaster in this instance is finding itself in this situation that it is in now is largely because of how it has run the organization, because some of the issues that are being raised now didn't exist, or certainly not to the extent that they are now, before?
One would not attribute the status of the public broadcaster particularly to the sports and the expense part of it. It cannot be that it is the sports section that has led to the dilemma. So given the facts at hand, we are unable to leave it and say this is the status quo. But also we're still waiting for SABC to come on board and say this is where we stand. We have not received that.
But to what extent then, as the regulator, do you or would you also accept that you may have had a hand also? Because when one looks at the evolution of broadcasting in this country, free to air in particular, when ETV was licensed, there was an understanding that there would be more free-to-air operators coming on board. In a sense, ETV was a test case. Again, you fast forward to, the subscription service. There again, we're supposed to open up, but things didn't happen as fast enough, to the extent that those who were later licensed to compete with multi-choice DSTV, for example, by the time they were licensed, they just couldn't compete, with that particular entity. So a lot of fingers, or at least some of the fingers, do point at the regulator. Would you agree?
I think the timing, the question can be linked to the timing. Currently, we are in a process of opening up licenses, free to air, and many others. That can really manage the weight that is being brought towards the public broadcaster at hand. But let's also look into how best can we find each other. We're saying economic sustainability, the capacity of our licenses need to be looked at. We are not throwing this without having thought about that. And what will break the ice is definitely how the hearings are going to lead us into some form of conclusion and guide the regulator by facts and also the strategy that's upcoming. And we're looking forward to change that is upheld by the SABC upcoming, the futuristic components they are referring to. I don't think the status will remain as is for especially with the interventions that are said to be coming up.
For much longer. Thanks very much for your time. Palesa Gadi from Icasa. Interested parties have, of course, until the 4th of February to make submissions.